All right, so picture this. You're building a business. You don't just want to ride the wave of some trendy thing.
Right.
You want something that lasts.
Yeah.
You want an edge.
Yeah.
Like you're building a moat around your business, not just like a sandcastle on the beach. And that's kind of what today's Dup Dive is all about, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more interesting is that the stuff we're diving into today, it was originally a lecture, believe it or not, in Mandarin Chinese.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're like decoding this lecture for you. And what's fascinating is how universal these business strategies actually are.
Oh, for sure.
They apply, no matter what field you're in, what industry, any of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much good strategy. I mean, it transcends those cultural and language barriers.
It totally does. It's like the core principles of what makes a business successful, they kind of shine through, right?
Yeah.
So in this lecture, they focus on this thing called the 7 powers of market dominance.
Yeah.
And now I know what you might be thinking, 7 powers. That sounds like, business jargon.
It does.
A little bit.
It has that ring to it.
It does.
Yeah.
But honestly, this framework, when you actually break it down, it's packed with really useful insights. Basically, what the lecturer drives home is that a strong business model, it doesn't just happen by accident. It usually means that that business has tapped into one or more of these powers to get that lasting success, to not just be, here today, gone tomorrow. And here's the other interesting part. Some of these powers are the things that will make you successful in those early stages, when you're just starting out, you're scrappy.
Right.
And others are more about maintaining that dominance once you've kind of made it, you're established.
It's like having, a roadmap for different stages of a business's life.
Ooh.
From being the scrappy upstart to becoming, the established player.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. Say, different phases, you need different tools, right?
Exactly.
So to kick things off, we're going to dive into 2 of these powers that are especially interesting, I think, and particularly useful for startups.
Okay.
Or, frankly, anyone who's looking to kind of shake things up in their industry, disrupt the existing market. Counter-positioning and cornering resources. Think of these as your early stage power moves.
I like.
Right, you're coming out swinging.
Yeah.
So counter-positioning, this was fascinating. And the way the lecturer explained it really highlights why bigger companies often seem so slow to react when something truly new and disruptive comes along.
Yeah, it's true.
It's kind of counterintuitive. You'd think they have all the resources. They'd be the first ones to jump on something new, but
You'd think so.
often they're not. So imagine, picture yourself. You're running this huge company.
Okay.
You're at the top of your game. You've got this product. It's super successful.
All right.
And then along comes this little startup.
Uh-oh.
And they're not even going after your main market.
Right.
They're focused on this little niche. You're barely even paying attention.
Like, let them have it.
Exactly. You're thinking they can have their little corner of the sandbox. It's not threatening my empire.
Right. It's fine.
Exactly. But here's the thing. What if that niche that they're focusing on, what if that actually starts to grow?
Right.
And what if their little innovation and the thing that they're doing differently, what if that starts to chip away at your market share, even though you dismissed it at first?
Yeah, then you've got a problem.
Yeah, then you're in trouble. And that's exactly the dilemma that this lecture highlights. It's like, do you, as that big company, do you try to embrace this new thing, even if it means potentially hurting your existing business?
Right.
Or do you ignore it and risk, getting left behind?
Yeah, it's a tough call.
It's a really tough call, and there's no easy answer. To illustrate this, the lecturer actually gave this really interesting real-world example of a company that was developing a new kind of heart stent.
Okay.
So we're talking medical technology here.
High stake.
High stakes. And this new stent, it was clearly superior in a lot of ways.
House.
It was less invasive for the patient, had faster recovery times, all these advantages.
Okay, so it's better for the patient, but...
But here's the catch. It was initially aimed at a smaller segment of the market. And this is where the whole counter-positioning thing gets really interesting. So put yourself in the shoes of the big, established medical device companies.
Okay, I'm imagining.
They see this new technology coming out, and on the one hand, they're like, well, it's better, it's more effective.
Right.
But on the other hand, if they embrace this new heart stent technology, it might mean undercutting their own existing products.
Right, their bread and butter.
Exactly. The ones that they're making, the bulk of their profits from right now. So it's this catch-22, and it happens all the time. What's the move? Do you buy out the startup and then just kind of quietly shelve the technology, to protect your existing market share?
This sounds kind of brutal.
It does sound brutal, but it's a very real strategy.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, protect the cash cow, as they
Yeah.
say, right. But then you have the flip side.
The what if.
Exactly. What if you ignore it? You think, it's just a niche thing, and then suddenly it explodes.
Right. Then that little niche innovation becomes the gold standard.
It becomes the new big thing.
And you've not only missed out on the opportunity, but you've potentially created your own worst enemy.
You've created a competitor.
Yep.
And that's the beauty of counterpositioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like these startups, these disruptors, they can actually use that inertia, that slowness of the big players to their advantage.
Absolutely. It's like they're so busy protecting their turf, they don't see the game changing around them.
They're looking in the wrong direction. It's like that whole innovator's dilemma thing.
Exactly.
So have you ever, looking at different industries, have you ever wondered why it seems like some of these big companies are so slow to innovate? Well, now you have a little peek behind the curtain, right?
Yeah, sometimes sticking with what works is the riskiest move.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true. Okay, so that's counterpositioning. Let's move on to the next power move for early stage businesses, cornering resources. What I love about this one is it can apply to any field.
Oh, absolutely.
But it might look different depending on what world you're in.
Right. It's not always about physical resources, though those are important too.
Sure, like if you're in manufacturing or something.
Exactly. But this is more about identifying what are those key assets, those things that are absolutely critical in your field.
The things that give you an edge.
And then how do you build an advantage around them? The lecturer gave this really interesting example of Pixar.
The animation studio.
Yeah, so they didn't just corner the market on storytelling, though they're brilliant at that.
They're masters at it.
They cornered the market on talent early on. They got the best animators, the top storytellers. They built this dream team.
It's like, how do you even compete with that if you're starting out and they've got all the best people?
Exactly. It's like trying to field a team against the all-stars.
And they had that advantage early on, which is huge.
Huge. Gave them this incredible head start. And the lecturer contrasted this with TSMC.
TSMC, now they're in a whole different world, right?
Completely. Semiconductors, the brains of everything.
So what did they corner? Was it like some rare earth mineral or something?
Not quite. They've cornered a different kind of resource. It's their technical expertise, obviously, in this highly specialized field.
Okay, so it's like they've got the brains.
But they've also perfected their manufacturing process. They can make these incredibly complex chips at a scale and efficiency that's unmatched.
So they've got the brains, Andy, the muscle.
Exactly. And that combination, that's what gives them a massive cost advantage.
It's like a 1-2 punch. It makes you realize it's not just about what you have, it's about how well you use it.
Exactly. So much of strategy comes down to, what are the resources that truly matter in my field?
And can you get them? Can you hold on to them?
Right, because if you don't have them, someone else will. It's like a constant game of chess. So I'm curious, thinking about your own world, what would you say are those essential resources, those make or break things that are vital for success?
And even more importantly, how secure are those resources? Could a competitor swoop in and easily replicate what you got, or are you protected?
That's the question to be asking. Okay, so we've talked about early stage power moves. But what happens when a company's ready to scale, to really grow? That's where the next three powers come in. Economies of scale, switching costs, and network effects.
This is where things get really interesting.
Right. Like, how do you go from being a contender to dominating the whole game? Because surviving is one thing, but thriving, scaling, that's a whole other ball game.
It's a whole other level. All right, so first up, economies of scale. I gotta admit, this one always makes me think of those giant factories, those warehouses stacked to the ceiling with products.
Yeah, I can see that. It's that classic image of mass production.
Right. The more you make, the cheaper each unit gets, right?
Exactly. But the thing is, economies of scale, it's not just a manufacturing concept. It's just as relevant in the digital age, just in a different form. The lecturer actually used Netflix as an example.
Okay, so we're not talking about warehouses full of DVDs anymore.
Definitely not. Their warehouse is their streaming library. Think about it. Thousands of movies and shows.
And it seems like they're adding new stuff every day.
Right. And all of that content, all that technology, they spread the cost of that over, hundreds of millions of subscribers worldwide.
It's mind-boggling how many people have Netflix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though they're spending a ton on content, those economies of scale, it means they can offer a pretty competitive price.
Which makes it even harder for anyone else to compete, right?
Yeah.
Because who else can afford to just create that much stuff?
It's a huge barrier to entry. Now, switching gears a bit,
Yeah.
let's talk about switching costs.
Okay, this one sounds intriguing.
It's all about that stickiness.
Stickiness. What do you mean?
It's that thing that makes customers stay, even if they're not 100% satisfied, even if there might be a better option out there.
I see. So it's kind of like you're in a relationship, maybe it's not perfect,
Yeah.
but the thought of starting over is just too daunting.
The lecturer actually made that exact analogy. He talked about a couple that's been together for years, maybe even decades.
They probably have all their finances linked.
Right. They share friends, routines, maybe even pets.
So much baggage.
Exactly. They might drive each other nuts sometimes, but the thought of untangling their lives, dividing up the furniture,
Starting over.
it's just too much. So they stick it out, not necessarily out of love, but out of pure inertia.
That's hilarious and kind of sad, but I totally see how it applies to business.
Oh, absolutely. Companies want to be that long-term relationship, not the fling you forget about next week.
They want that customer loyalty, but ideally for the right reasons, right?
Of course. Ethically, businesses should aim to create genuine value, not just make it impossible to leave.
Right, it shouldn't be like a hostage situation.
Exactly. But the lecturer did a great job of breaking down the different types of switching costs. There are three main ones: financial, habitual, and social.
Okay, let's break those down. Financial costs, those seem pretty straightforward. Like, if I switch phone providers, I might have to pay a fee to break my contract.
Exactly. Any financial penalty for leaving.
Makes sense. So what about habitual costs? What are those?
It's more subtle. Humans are creatures of habit, right? We
Yeah.
get used to a certain software interface.
I hate learning how to use new software.
Right. Or even something as simple as the layout of a website. And even if there's something objectively better out there, there's still that learning curve.
That period of adjustment, that friction.
Exactly. That's the power of habitual costs. It's like sticking with that same coffee shop every morning, even though you know there's probably a better latte a block over.
Because you know exactly how to order what you like, you're in the habit. Makes total sense.
Right. And sometimes those habits are hard to break, even if we want to. Okay. And finally, there's social costs.
And this feels huge these days, especially with everything being online.
Huge. It's the cost of leaving a community, a network.
Oh, I totally get it. It's like back in the day when I was choosing a cell phone carrier, it was all about who my friends were with, so we could actually call each other without racking up crazy charges.
Exactly. You wanted to be on the same network as your people.
Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah.
And that, I feel like, is a perfect segue into our final power move in this growth phase. Network effects.
Ah, yes. Network effects. It's such a simple concept, but insanely powerful.
Explain it to me like I'm 5,
Okay, so imagine you have a platform.
like Facebook or something.
Sure, Facebook is a perfect example. But it could be anything. A marketplace, a dating app, an online forum.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So the more users that platform has, the more valuable it becomes for everyone who's on it.
Because there are more people to connect with, right?
Exactly. So if you're on a dating app, you want to be on the one with the most potential matches.
Mhm.
If you're a seller on a marketplace, you want to be where the buyers are.
It's like a snowball effect. The bigger it gets, the more attractive it becomes.
And the harder it becomes for anyone else to compete. Because suddenly, it's not just about the features of the platform itself.
It's about who else is there.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of network effects. They create these virtuous cycles, but they also create these interesting chicken or the egg dilemmas.
What do you mean?
Well, the lecturer used this example of LinePay, which is a mobile payment platform.
Okay, I've heard of that.
So they were wrestling with this question. Should they focus on attracting users first or businesses?
Because you need both, right?
Exactly. Without enough users, businesses aren't going to see the value in joining.
And without enough businesses signed up, users don't have anywhere to spend their money.
Precisely. So which comes first? It's like that age-old question.
It's a real head-scratcher. And it highlights how much strategy goes into building these network-driven businesses.
Absolutely. It's not just about building a cool product. You have to build an ecosystem.
You have to create that critical mass, that momentum.
Exactly. And that's no easy feat.
It's like you're building this engine, but it's got to have all the right parts working together.
Exactly. It's a complex system. But, all right, ready to move on to the final two powers in this framework?
Hit me with them.
All right, so these last two, the lecturer really framed them as essential for those mature businesses, you know, the ones that are aiming for that unshakable long-term dominance.
The ones that aren't just playing the game, they're running it.
Exactly. Like they've built their fortress. Now it's about making it impenetrable.
Love that. Okay, so lay it on me. What are these final two powers?
All right, so the first one is process power, and it's a little more nuanced than it might sound at first. It's not just about, having efficient systems in place.
Which is important, of course.
Oh, absolutely. You got to have your house in order.
Yep.
But process power, it's about taking it to the next level.
So it's like, it's not enough to just have a recipe. You need that secret ingredient, that special touch.
That's a great way to put it. It's about developing processes that are so ingrained in your company's DNA, they're so finely tuned, so unique to how you do things, that they become incredibly difficult to copy.
Even if someone had a step-by-step guide.
Even then, think about it like those legendary recipes that get passed down through generations,
Where the magic isn't just written down, it's in the technique.
Exactly. The lecture used Zara as a perfect example of this in action.
Zara, the clothing company. Okay, I'm with you.
So we all know they're like the kings of fast fashion, right? New designs every other week, it seems like.
It's amazing how quickly they move.
Right. But have you ever stopped to think about how they actually do it, and why hasn't anyone else been able to fully replicate their success?
I mean, I'm sure other companies have tried to copy their style.
Of course. But there's something about Zara's process. It's like this well-oiled machine. From design to manufacturing to distribution, they've got this incredibly orchestrated system, and it's been fine-tuned over decades.
It's like they have a secret formula.
In a way, they do, and it allows them to be so incredibly responsive to trends, even more so than their competitors. It's not just about speed, though. It's about a deep understanding of their customers, their supply chain, their own internal capabilities. It makes you realize that what we often perceive as effortless on the outside, they're just pulling these trendy clothes out of thin air.
Like it's magic.
Exactly. A lot of times, it's the result of incredible complexity and precision behind the scenes. It's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
No kidding. Speaking of things that take time to build, that leads us perfectly into that final power. Brand economy.
Ah, yes. The power of the brand.
And I gotta say, since this is a podcast, I guess we can't rely too much on fancy visuals for our branding, huh?
You bring up a really good point. Because it highlights how people often misunderstand what brand really is.
It's more than just a logo.
Way more. It's not just a logo. It's not a catchy slogan. It's not even just a marketing campaign. It's a feeling. It's about the trust you build with your customers.
It's that feeling when you see a product and you just instantly know, okay, this is going to be good.
Yeah.
Without even having to read the label.
Exactly. The lecture gave this example of luxury items, like those high-end watches that get passed down through generations.
Your family heirlooms?
Exactly. Or those handbags that cost more than a car. And the thing is, those objects represent something. They represent a legacy of quality, a promise that the craftsmanship, the prestige, all of that, it endures.
Like, you're not just buying the product, you're buying into a whole story, a history.
Precisely. And that's the power of a truly strong brand. It's about forging a connection that goes way beyond a single transaction. It's about building loyalty that lasts a lifetime.
It makes you think about the brands that you personally trust without even thinking twice. What is it about them that's earned that level of loyalty? What are they doing right?
Are they consistently delivering on their promises? Is it their customer service, their values? Those are the questions businesses need to be asking themselves if they want to build a brand that truly stands the test of time.
No shortcuts. Well, there you have it, our deep dive into the 7 powers of market dominance, expertly translated and unpacked from a lecture, originally in Mandarin Chinese, no less. Talk about a global perspective. We went from understanding why some companies hesitate to embrace new ideas, to unraveling the magic behind how Zara operates, to appreciating the enduring power of a well-built brand.
And remember, while we explored each of these powers individually, out there in the real world, those lines can get blurry.
Right. It's not like businesses just pick one power and stick with it.
Exactly. The most successful companies, they don't just master one of these powers, they figure out how to weave several of them together.
They're like multi-classing in a video game.
Exactly. They stack those abilities, and that's how they build that truly unassailable advantage.
It's like they've got layers of defense, a multifaceted approach.
And that's the key takeaway here. Whether you're just starting out or you're leading a company that's been around for a while, think about how you can apply these powers in your own world. What are your unique strengths? What are those resources that you can leverage to set yourself apart? What processes can you refine, make them even better than the competition? And how can you build a brand that truly resonates with your audience, that builds that trust, that loyalty we've been talking about?
Consider the 7 powers your strategic toolkit.
Use it to build that unshakable moat around your business.
That's all for this deep dive, folks. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building.